Good evening, everyone. It is wonderful to have such a large gathering of young people from across the length and breadth of the country on this International Youth Day. So, our best wishes to all the young participants of International Youth Day. We are here today for this knowledge session on city governance, which is the first in a series that we have planned for you in Prajatantra 2022-23. I am Mayura, and on behalf of the National Institute of Urban Affairs and Praja Foundation, I extend a very warm welcome to all our participants and our esteemed guest speakers. Before I introduce the speakers, let me take a moment to spell out the ground rules for the session. A humble request to all participants in the meeting to kindly keep themselves on mute at all times to enable an uninterrupted setting for the speakers. Please put any questions that you may have in the chat box, and our speakers shall try and answer most of them. This platform has an expected delay of approximately 10 seconds. Hence, some attendees, depending on the internet connection, may experience delay in receiving the audio and video. For the participants who have not been able to join due to the limit of the Zoom meeting, this session is also live streamed on Praja Foundation's YouTube channel and Facebook pages of Praja Foundation and National Institute of Urban Affairs. Moving forward, it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's speakers. We have Mr. Tikender Singh Panwar. Mr. Panwar was the directly elected Deputy Mayor of Shimla City. The city saw many initiatives under his able leadership, such as preparation of the Smart City Plan, City Mobility Plan, and others, with a strong element of people's participation. Mr. Panwar was also a member of the National Task Force in the country to review the 74th Constitutional Amendment, which speaks about decentralized governance. Apart from this, he has represented the city and the country on many international platforms. A very warm welcome to Tikender sir. Joining him, we have Professor Debolina Kundu from the National Institute of Urban Affairs. Dr. Kundu has over 20 years of professional experience in the field of development studies. She has worked as a consultant with several bilateral and multilateral agencies and agencies of the United Nations on issues of urbanization, migration, urban development policies, municipal finance, governance, and exclusion. She is the country investigator, India, for the Global Challenges Research Fund, Center for Sustainable, Healthy, and Learning Cities and Neighborhoods, which is supported by the UK Research and Innovation. A member of the 5th Delhi Finance Commission and various other committees of the Government of India, she has several articles published in books and journals. A very warm welcome, Dr. Kundu, and I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you, Mayura. Let me first congratulate all the institutions attached, both Praja and National Institute of Urban Affairs, for taking up this important knowledge session. Before I pose the most important question to our panelist, I would just like, I would also request him to reflect upon the urban trajectory since independence. We are aware that there is an upward urban trajectory, and however, the growth rate of population did decline in the 80s, and thereafter there has been a declining rate which picked up only by decimal 0.03% in the decade of 2001-11. So, Tikenderji, could you trace the history of urbanization starting from since independence and its implications on urban governance in the country in a phased manner? Like what happened basically prior to liberalization and post-liberalization, and how urban governance is connected to it?
Thank you, ma'am. Mayura, I hope I'm audible. I hope no other test is required now for the audible test. Can you go ahead?
You're audible, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am, once again. And I think it's a great pleasure to speak in front of hundreds of young people. And a very warm welcome to all the young, the youth who are considered to be the future of our country, not just the future, but even the present of our country. And I think it's very interesting that, this topic about urban governance, though which is seldom discussed amongst the young people, and has kind of been neglected since since the beginning. So I must congratulate NIUA and Praja Foundation for really taking this issue and actually bringing it to the fore, and maybe just discussing some of the nuances of what urban is. I believe because when I was elected as a deputy mayor, most of our elected people didn't even know what is the difference between urban and rural. Then all those nuances were kind of really very, very important. Having said that, I think it's very interesting what, ma'am, you have. I mean, the way you started. I think there's a very interesting trajectory of urbanization, of urban governance in the country. So what I think is that, according to me, there are three distinct phases. The first phase that begins from the 1947, from the 1950s to the 80s, late 80s. That's the first phase, where we call it. I mean, the state was really assertive. When I say state, it means it was the country. I mean, the nation. The state as such, the state as an apparatus. And then from post, mid 80s, things started churning. Then we move on to the 90s, and I believe most of the generation here is post 90s. So I'm in a hybrid, so I've seen the previous phase, and also the phase that started in the 90s. So probably younger people who have joined here are all post 90s. So maybe they do not even have a knack of how things were planned post. So I think it's important. And then from the 90s to say 2014, when we have the new government, and since 2014, when we talk about smart cities, when we talk about cities becoming like centers of engines of growth and whatnot. Having said that, ma'am, I think what is important for our very young people to know that I think right from the 47 to from the 50s, when cities were planned, there was one very clear understanding, very clear characteristic: how are we going to grow? Because when I say how are we, and it is also called, by the way, the Nehruvian model. Because Nehru was like quite important there. So if I say the fundamentals of the Nehruvian model or the state planning was that we started thinking about urbanization. We were predominantly a country which was living in villages, predominantly rural. Two, the baseline characteristic was that we had just come out from the World War II. We had just come out from the famous Bengal famine, and so abysmally poor nation. So how do you develop in such a poor nation where you had hunger, where you had not even self-sufficiency in food grain, and all those issues were like very pivotal in the developmental phase. And I remember, I'll just share one anecdote, and probably that will give an idea to our young people. So, and the fourth one was that, the cities were not planned by the people. That's also very important. The cities were planned right top bottom, with the very strong consideration that the cities must be inclusive. Though I reserve my comment how inclusive that planning was, but not really very participatory, but with the clear direction that, look, we have to develop. Look, we have to at least kill hunger. Look, at least we have to provide some shelter. And if I just and there's another important thing. We have the east and the west Pakistan, lots of refugees entering. I have this figure. I think we had almost 80 lakh registered refugees, although we were able to accommodate not more than 5 or 6 lakh. According to the government statistics. So therefore there's this massive rise in cities, so large number of refugees coming. And the fifth was because as I was just trying to draw the attention, how would we develop? So the base of development was industrialization. So we will industrialize our nation, and the industries are predominantly going to be in the urban centers. So therefore, urbanization was the key. So the anecdote, that I want to share with my young friends here is when Chandigarh was made. I am not sure how many of them have visited Chandigarh, but Chandigarh is like kind of a very model town, and along those lines, we had many model towns. There's a famous Punjabi song, by the way, model town Punjabi song. So, and likewise, so those towns were developed. Why I'm so passionate about Chandigarh, because when Chandigarh was made, Nehru, gave a very clear, and we all know, Chandigarh was designed by the famous architect Le Corbusier, and so Nehru just gave him one instruction, that Corbusier, remember, don't in I mean ensure that Chandigarh doesn't turn out to be a ghost city. Now, what did he mean by that? He meant, because the large scale migration, abysmally poor people, because post 90s generation doesn't even know what poverty was and what poverty is. So, this large migration who had no assets at all, lots of people, and we were like completely squeezed by the British when we got independence. So he said, just ensure that Chandigarh doesn't turn out to be a ghost city, because if you construct a town and a city which is beyond the scope and the capacity of the people to live in, then it will turn into a ghost city. So there are very interesting characteristics when Corbusier designed Chandigarh. Of course, not to go into the beauty of the designs, though he is being ridiculed now for that. But he ensured that you will not have plaster on the walls. He ensured that you will not use steel, so that the cost gets increased. He ensured that there won't be downpipes. Very, very small things were taken care. And I'm told that one of the politicians recently who bought a house in Chandigarh, he had to buy that house for almost 20 crores. So in a town and a city that was feared to be a ghost town, ghost city, that's the beauty how this town and city was developed. Just to give that anecdote. So, that's how we laid the foundation of industrial, and that's how we had industrial towns. Because I come from North India, so I'll speak more about that. I come from Simla. So that's one character. And then we had, towns like Simla or the towns and the cities that were built by the British, which also continued post-independence. But also not to miss the fact, that once you are building a town, then what will happen to your working people? So that was, one of the important considerations. That, and again go back to Punjab. One of my favorite towns in Nangal, called the Nangal Township, where you had these large industries, the National Fertilizers Limited, and then the Alkalis. One plant, and then of course Bhakra Dam, where you were able to tap water of Satluj and Bias, and then Punjab, which was known for being flooded all through the rainy season, and now you don't find any flood because you were able to take water right from Nangal to Rajasthan. You have that Indira Canal. But what I'm trying to say about urbanization is, ma'am, that in Nangal, even if you visit today, you will find houses of the working people. All those who constructed the Bhakra Dam are still livable. That habitat is still livable. You have a front yard and a backyard. So that was another characteristic post 50s, post 47, that you'll have to take care. So there was a centralized planning, like you had. Now I come to more structured form. You had the School of Planning Architecture developed. You had the Town and Country Planning. You had the Ministry of Urban Development getting developed. But then you also started building, master plans. So, for example, the Delhi Master Plan, and likewise, there were different master plans. Though there were hardly any intervention of the people, though once I dug into the literature, so they used to just visit the people, had some munadi, some announcement, and ask and seek some suggestions from the people. But they said, okay, this is the number of people who are going to come to the towns from the rural India. This is the number of houses we want. This is how the infrastructure has to develop. And as 5 years or as 20 years passed by, then they said, okay, we have failed. Now, this is what I'm going to actually touch upon when I speak about post 90s cities, where planning, which was quite a state apparatus, which I would not say was a complete failure, but definitely it failed because there was no participatory planning. And that's how you find, this duality confronting the cities. So you planned for 100, but you had more than 150. You had the urban sprawls. And it's not a big surprise today that 40% of the urban population, ma'am, just correct me if I'm wrong, because 2011 census says that almost 31%, but I believe now it's almost 34% of the people live in urban India, which must be, in crores. I mean, probably more than 50 crores if we have 140 crore population. And if 40% are living in slums, what does it mean? Just close your eyes. My young people should understand. And which means it's more than the population of United States of America. That's, the kind of urban sprawl. So we had a planning system. We were trying to mitigate our not just a crisis, but, mitigate our problems. We did to a fairly large extent, but then we entered into another trap. And the trap was that we were not able to address, all those problems. There are many reasons for that, but I think to me, what was important is there was hardly any planning from below. There was all top bottom. And of course, the whole question maybe, which will be a little difficult for our young people to understand, and I don't want to go into those nuances, is the whole question of capital formation, because these cities were also meant for large capital formation, because how do you develop? You don't have any capital. So and the indigenous private capital was not even 300 CR in 1947. So you created all that political economy, and cities were like the centers of that. So you had pauperization of the masses, where the people became poor, but then you also had the rising elite, which was already there, but new elites joined. And you can easily find that duality, that stark miserable conditions of the people, particularly post 90s. So I don't know whether I should touch post 90s right now, ma'am, or do you have something else in mind? I think that is what I wanted to just.
In the introductory question, I did mention about the most important question, and which is again centered around the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act.
I'll come to that.
So I would also like to understand from you, as well as in the interest of our audience who are youngsters, what is why did 74th Constitutional Amendment at all come into being, and what is the implication, and why is it considered a turning point in the urban governance story of the country? If you could also touch upon the 12 schedule functions, and why do we say that decentralization in India is still partial? It did not happen in the manner it was conceptualized. So if you could just throw some light on this, and then we could move on to the next question.
Okay. I think so, yeah, and that's how we into 90s. I mean, I was talking about how things have happened, but before 90s, we had another very interesting work, ma'am. I mean, of course, you are aware of that, and that is that we had the first urban commission. And the first urban commission, which was headed by Charles Correa, one of the famous architects that we have produced in the country. And he, why do I mention his name? Because he and I, we were together in an Urban Age conference, and he said, the competition shouldn't be amongst the cities. The competition should be between the cities and the state governments. I mean, just to make our young people understand, he said the state governments do not want the cities to be independent. I mean, when I say independent, it doesn't mean a sovereign territory, but independent means in its functions. And that the state governments treat cities more as their adjuncts. Now, why do they treat them as their adjuncts? Is because of the huge capital formation that takes place, and the state governments, and of course there are other forces, and even the union government doesn't want to. Delhi, for that matter, is an example. How the union government controls Delhi and many of its union territories. So that is one point. But then why did it happen? I mean, why did we have the 74th Constitutional Amendment? So I think Charles Correa was, I mean, if you see the first urban commission, it was more focused on manufacturing, that the cities would be manufacturing hubs. And that's what we learned from the Industrial Revolution. That's how most of our industrial nations developed, be it England, be it Germany, or of course, Germany was a little different, but most of the Europe, that we'll have modernity, we have modernism, so people will migrate from countryside because it's not a sustainable mode of productive development. So therefore, and industries are going to lead. That will be the steering or steering the urbanization it didn't happen that way in India. And I don't want to go into those details. But then it was Rajiv Gandhi who came in, and and of course, because post 90s, the role of the state. I don't think, ma'am, I should dwell more on that. The reasons why this large capital formation and why we shifted to. But this shift was already taking place at the global level in the 60s and in the 70s probably, where they said the state must be state has no business to do this to run the affairs of basic services. So when I say services, this transformation, which is very important, transformation of whether education is a right, whether water is a right or a need. So this debate is quite old, and 60s, 70s at the global level, and of course 90s, they said no, this is not. I mean, we should open up. We should ensure that we have the private capital coming in, and the centralized planning should be given off, and we should have more decentralized planning. People should decide for themselves. Fair. I don't think that can be contested. So how do you do that? Because urban development is a state subject, as we have three important lists in our constitution: the union list, the concurrent list, and the state list. Unlike what Nepal is doing, I'll come to that a little later if I get some time, because Nepal has been able to create 5 lists where there is an urban list also, ma'am, and the urban list has specified roles of urban people. Somewhat kind of development of a 74th constitutional amendment. So yeah, Rajiv Gandhi was very particular about that, and so that's why you had the urban commission, but then of course, unfortunately, he was killed. So the genesis lies there, and that's how this trajectory started developing. That you can't run. These large important centers from without even providing not even minimum democratic space. So one, of course, there was an economic reason that cities must become autonomous. Cities must manage their affairs. So this whole question of and of course reforms. So how do you build the reforms? What I call neoliberal capitalism, or neoliberal reforms. It's a jargon which I don't think my young people should go right now into those details. But yeah, I think those reforms, how do you carry that? So you build in, you structure those reforms, and at the same time, you ensure that there is democratic, decentralized participation. I remember that, ma'am, because the architect of the 74th Constitutional Amendment, there was this push from the bureaucracy as well. K.C. Sivaramakrishnan, he and I, we were together in a national task force to review the 74th Constitutional Amendment somewhere in 2012 or 13, after maybe 2 decades of the 74th Amendment. So what is the 74th Amendment? The 74th Constitutional Amendment is because, as I said, that urban development is a state subject. So the states in different places were actually deciding in their own manner. Take, for example, West Bengal, where Ashok Mitra was very pivotal once the left front took over in late 1970s. He was that architect of democratic decentralization, and he just ensured that and of course at the panchayati level, that's rural, and at the urban level. So the first and foremost, and then we had certain places in many other places, for example, Rajasthan also, there was some experiment done, but there was also not a universal thing happening, pan India. So pan India, there was this amendment, there's a constitutional amendment that if you, the elections to the local bodies must be held every 5 years. Can you believe? My young people may not be able to understand that there were certain cities and towns where there were no elections for decades together. And so elections must take place after every 5 years. Then the city should be structured in wards. The people, and it should be through an election. So the ward councillors, or the corporators as we call, so they should be election to the ward corporators, and then they should elect either the president or the mayor, or whatever the term is according to the state design, the state structure. The third important thing is, which is very important, is that there are three Fs, which is the three Fs means functions, functionaries, and finances. So all these three Fs must be transferred to the city government. Just allow me some time to just delve on that, because I think that is very important. What does it mean? Take, for example, functions. Praja has done, by the way, a very fascinating study, I think recently, few years back, where they reviewed, the 74th Amendment, how many functions were transferred. So under the 12th schedule, there are 18 functions. I don't go into, you just Google it and you'll come to know our young people are like really very high tech. They just, you'll come to know all those 18 functions. But the most important function of the 74th Amendment, and which was supposed to be transferred to the city government, is city planning. The towns, the cities must plan for themselves. Now, what does it mean? Now, this was, ma'am, when I became the deputy mayor. Let me share this very funny anecdote. So I thought that now I'm the elected deputy mayor. Probably now I am responsible for running the affairs of the city, of the town. And it was not too long. Maybe a few months or a few weeks down the line that I realized, no, I'm nobody. There's some other force, there's some other players who are actually running the affairs of the city. So when I say running the affairs of the city, it's not just the election. It's how do you plan? Now, take for example, if you're elected, or even if you're not elected, you are a citizen where you vote regularly, and you require a particular infrastructure, say a hospital. Now, where does that hospital should come? Now, housing, kind of working force that you have. So, what kind of housing would you desire? All this is part of the city planning. What you call the master plan, what we also call the land use plan. Land use plan is just one part which our young people should understand. So, who plans? If I ask this question and throw back to our young members here, have they ever been asked, ever in the history, ever in their lifetimes, that, how do you desire the town to be? Especially, particularly young girls. What do they want? How should the street be designed? Have they ever been asked? So, this whole thing that should have been transferred to the cities. To the cities didn't mean that, it's just the elected people. Of course, they required help of the professional, but, it's the people. The people should have designed. So this important function, forget about nowhere in the country, please mark my words, except in Kerala, where you have the people's plan and where, I'll come to that maybe a little later, but nowhere in the country, city development is planned by the city government. Let's take very large cities, forget about even smaller cities, because they say you don't have the capacity to plan. Where is your inherent capacity? But what about Mumbai? Mumbai, which has a budget of, I don't know about the budget, but which has a fixed deposit of more than 50,000 crores. What about Delhi, which has, which has a state government? So even in Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, it's not the municipal corporations, it's not the elected city governments that plan the towns, it's the development authorities. What in our jargon, I'll call that as jargon, we call them as the parastatals. So it's the parastatals that this Delhi Development Authority, which is a non-democratic entity, the Mumbai Development Authority, again, a non-democratic entity. They are the ones who plans. They are the ones who draw a line on the map. This is how the master plan should be made. This is where the people are going to stay. That's how your mobility is to be structured. And of course, with the latest 2041, if I get time, I'll speak on that. The Delhi Master Plan is a far grave kind of departure from even the earlier ones. So I think that's important. So the functions. So this Praja, I don't think that I should. So functions, and one of the most important functions was city planning, which should have been transferred. And you are aware, that's why I just want to share these anecdotes. And you must go into that Praja work. Correct me, we have people from Praja here, but I think not more than 3 to 5 functions have been universally transferred to the cities in the last 25 years. So that's a serious challenge. And what are these universal functions? So I'm very funnily, I used to tell my people that what is our work? I mean, so the elected members are the first garbage people of the country. So the garbage is the first function. The second is when you and I, we were born or we are born. I mean, when somebody is born in the family, so the birth certificate comes from the city government, and when you and I die, so the death certificate. And now even that is naturally that's going to come from the hospitals if you die in the hospital. So apart from that, somewhere you'll find mobility, transport under city government. Other place you won't find. Somewhere you'll find water utility under city government. Other place you'll find it's not like that. Of course, Kerala, as I was mentioning, Kerala has that. Even if a parastatal prepares the master plan, the city plan, it is subjected to city council for approval, whereas no such approval is required in any of the others. So functions are key. I mean, if you have to empower the city councils, the city mayors, and the people, I think functions must be transferred, and we've seen that's not happening. Why that's not happened is another question we'll deal a little later if we get time. The second one was, about functionaries. So when I say functionaries, what does it mean? NIUA, I mean, they're competent enough to comment on that, but NIUA has been very instrumental because it's a think tank of the government, not now, but right from the inception. So they train our officers, and the officers, I mean, they train not just in India, they take to different parts, they go to different parts of the country, they build their capacities. When I say officers, means your commissioners, your additional commissioners and whatnot, with the particular nuances, these the city governments, what the fundamental difference between a city government, state, and the union government is that the union government plans and throws it down to the state government. The state government plans and it throws down to the city government or our rural governments at the Panchayati Raj. The city government plans and also executes. So it's an executive body. It has to execute. I mean, it doesn't just keep it at the planning stage. Execution is the key. So which means it is a kind of interface between people and a kind of governance structure that we have built in our under the ambit of our constitution. So therefore, you require certain kind of people who understand those nuances and who are very practical, But what we all of a sudden find, take for example, Indore. So we all know, I mean, Indore is considered to be a slightly better city as far as solid waste is concerned. So there was an officer who was quite instrumental to that. Of course, there was a team, not just an officer, the team. So now that officer is gone. He's no more the commissioner of that place. So how do you do that? I think that's an important, and most of the states do not even have a cadre as far as municipal cadres. Forget about the top officers, but even officers at the engineering level, at other levels. So there's no cadre, so they get transferred. So they come on deputation because if their children are studying in towns, and once they do, then they just move back. So this is not a system. And then coming to the finances. I mean, it's really a joke. I mean, for the simple reason, forget about Mumbai and Bengaluru, but can you believe that 90% to 92% of the cities are not even able to pay the salaries of their staff? Forget about creation of capital, capital formation or undertaking developmental activities. Why is this so? Because the taxation structure is so hierarchical. And the space for creating avenues for the cities to dig into some of the resources is so limited. And on top of that, we had the finance commissions. And forget about me, because I'm a practitioner. I served the city for 5 years. But let's take a professionals report. The Reserve Bank of India. Just a recent report, they said, you just cannot understand the cities being sustainable if you do not transfer the finances. So we have a model of finances. Most of the cities had their revenue from octroi, but then octroi was smashed. I do not know how many of you understand what octroi is. It's a kind of entry fees into the cities when goods are sold in the town. So that was almost, according to a finance report, 40 to 45% of the expenditure used to be met through octroi. So then they said, no, because we can't have octroys in every town and city. So then we had VAT, and of course now we had this jargon of GST. So a finance commission was, just drew a formula that uh, on the basis of your demography, on the basis of the population, we will ensure that you get substantial chunk. But the hard fact is that in some of the states we have this, even the state finance commission. So this devolution, so the finances are transferred. But earlier, which used to be 45%, now this finance commission grants do not even meet more than 15% of the total
Yeah, so
revenue
can I,
expenditure.
can I come in?
Yes, ma'am,
If you
please.
could elaborate on the powers of the mayors, and also how does a mayor function vis-a-vis a commissioner in a city, and
Okay.
what is the tussle between both
So
of them?
I was just coming to that one because
Yeah, because
yeah. So I
we
think
are running
these.
out of time. We
Oh,
do
is
not
it,
have
ma'am? Oh my God, the time is such an important constant. I didn't realize
conversation.
that. So yeah. So I think what we also should know is, I mean, and this leads me to the current stature. As I said, because urban development is a state subject, so we have different functions of mayors in different states. I'll cite some anecdotes also. Uh, Somewhere the term is for 5 years. For example, in Simla, it was 5 years when we were directly elected. And a direct election means that people elect you directly. Just like we had in Madhya Pradesh and Himachal also in Simla, we had where the mayor and the deputy mayor were directly elected by the people, not amongst the councillors. I don't want to go into the merits and the demerits of the system. Then in certain states you have where the mayors are elected just for 2.5 years, and then again you have election amongst the councillors. So that's and the third is a model particularly about where the center controls the union territories, where you had the Delhi mayor and you had Chandigarh mayor, where the term of the mayor is just for a year. And I remember, I mean, very funnily asking, this is a very funny anecdote. In one of the conferences, probably Ma'am Devolina was also there, organized by the NIUA. And I asked this ma'am, I mean, who was the mayor of Chandigarh, ma'am, what do you do? Because 6-7 months takes to understand, what the city is. So she said, no, it's very nice. First 3 months goes into welcome parties, and the later 3 months goes into, farewell parties. This is a reality, okay? But forget about this part. Let's take, for example, the part where you have a 5-year mayor, where you have a directly elected mayor. Nowhere the mayor is an executive head. When I say executive head, the executive head happens to be the commissioner. But then you have certain positive elements also, ma'am. For example, in West Bengal, where, and even Madhya Pradesh, I am not sure whether Madhya Pradesh continues that practice, where the power of the mayor is not just the mayor, it's the mayor in council, where the mayor in council acts like a cabinet. So once the cabinet takes the decision, the chief secretary is bound to implement it. Likewise, in Calcutta and most of the municipal corporations in West Bengal, they have this principle of mayor in council, where the mayor in council acts as a cabinet, and the commissioner is bound to uh, to implement. Though in the 74th constitutional amendment we had, the DPCs. I don't think I have to go into those details. But the hard fact is, take for example Haryana. Can you believe in Haryana, in the act, in the municipal act, there is a provision that the commissioner can recommend the dissolution of the council and the suspension of the mayor. I mean, so directly elect, not. I mean, even a directly elected mayor is under the control of an administrator, uh, and the administrator is appointed by the state government. So, ma'am, I think what is important is it is also more of how things are working. Therefore, you'll find, and another very funny thing, I mean, which I've always been quoting, and I would love to share that with our young people here also. So, when you ask me what is the function of the mayor, okay, so I always used to tell them the function of the mayor is keep on cutting the ribbons and keep on kissing the child, because that's how you're going to get the photographs on the front page of the newspapers. Beyond that, mark my words, can you believe when we were reviewing the 74th constitutional amendment, the Mumbai mayor, okay, who has almost 5 members of parliament coming from Mumbai, maybe 30 MLAs, after being the mayor, ma'am, she wants to become become an MLA, okay, because that's how the power structure lies. And I think that's where the intervention is required. So after 25, 26 years or whatever, how many years of after the 74th Amendment, what we require is strengthening not the mayor, but institution of the mayor, the institution of the council. And unfortunately, with the new model of smart cities where the special purpose vehicle comes into force, I'm not sure how many of my young people knows that the special purpose vehicle, a complete business model, and the mayor is out of the SPP. So here is a model where some professionals are going to design, and decide, and the elected council, forget about the mayor, even the elected council is not part of that. So it's a serious challenge when we talk about cities. But then also we have some of the some very important positive interventions, and that's why I go back to Bengal, I go back to Kerala, where people spend 40% of the budget goes to the local bodies, and even in Madhya Pradesh for that matter. So yeah, I think, ma'am,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, what control do local people and individual citizens have on the way their cities are governed? Do they at all have? If they have, in what ways? And
Ma'am,
what
the
do you
control
feel?
only comes after 5 years when you have elections.
Yeah,
But
and what do
but
you?
it's not that it's not structured. If you go to by the 74th Amendment, I think that's why I'm laying so much emphasis on the 74th Amendment. How do local people control? So in our constitutional framework, the structure is that we should have ward sabhas, where every elector becomes is a member of the ward sabha, and they should elect a ward committee. What local people should push for, or what civil societies should push for, is holding of these ward sabhas, constitution of these ward committees, and that's how you uh, hold the city government accountable. And when I say city government, it's not just the mayor, even the commissioners and all. Unfortunately, this process is completely absent, man, completely, except in one or two states. Uh, and but then there is massive alienation. I don't have time to go into that. The alienation, the process of urbanization. The kind of informality that has creeped in, the huge informal sector. Uh, Probably the 74th Amendment also doesn't address about that. Take, for example, migration. I think in the portal, e-Shram portal, we have already more than 20 crores migrant. Uh, so, how do you understand their problems? Where are the structures and processes? Probably we require out of the box. We require out of the box kind of understanding, and maybe some new nuances, some new interventions to ensure that it is made more participatory. And ma'am, I don't think, ma'am, but let me go into that name. Lefebvre, gave this slogan, "Right to the City." I think people have to assert the right to the city, and the right to city, I think, to me, it has to be ward sabhas. It has to be ward committees. So this pressure group must come from the people, and I know the power of that. If they start doing that, it really can make large shifts.
And it could also be a step further, as the NNURM had suggested, from the area sabhas that
Ma'am,
goes
I couldn't hear
beyond.
that.
Can't you hear me?
Now I can hear you, ma'am,
Yeah.
but I
So
missed what you said.
yeah. So what I was saying is that even one could go a step further in ensuring area sabhas beyond the ward committees, so that
Yes,
for the
definitely.
larger wards you have multiple area sabhas who can
Absolutely.
bring their
Absolutely.
concerns to the local corporation,
Absolutely.
the
Absolutely.
corporators. That would
Absolutely.
also, yeah.
Yeah, and I think, ma'am, this because this is something that I think we need to just catch up, because this is a generation, because my generation was more into what we call the third stage of industrial revolution. This is the fourth generation industrial revolution that speaks about Internet of Things, that speaks about artificial intelligence, platform-based economy, and whatnot. I think those platforms are also very important if we can't
Yes.
meet physically, because as I said, informal workers, where we create these platforms and mount pressure on city governments, ensuring A, B, C, D, whatever. So these forums also make a difference, but I hardly see them, where they act as pressure group. Maybe one or two instances I can cite, which I am personally engaged with, is in Bangalore, where they have the citizens group, and they use both the physical and the non-physical. This platform to ensure people's participation, to just create a space for their understanding.
I had also a related question for you. How do you think we can overcome the barriers that exist today in connecting the people with the governing institutions for their grievance redressal and for other forms of engagement in the day-to-day activities?
Ma'am, I just couldn't understand. What does that mean?
Okay, so how do we overcome
Uh-huh.
the barriers that exist today between the citizenry and the governing institutions for grievance redressal
Okay.
and also for day-to-day engagement in civic services?
I think barriers are, ma'am, quite inherent in the system. So when I say inherent in the system, I think we go back to the system, but then we can't wait till we are able to just smash the current system and bring in some new sort of nuances or structures. But having said that, I think as I pointed out, the whole question of IT, the whole question of okay, you can't come on the streets and make your demand raised, but then I think all these platforms can be used, and this pressure group can be built, ensuring that at least some of the basics. Because ma'am, what we are fighting for is not, these are existential issues. Can you believe? People not getting water for 5 days in a row. These are existential issues. Your road is, I mean, you do not have a proper sewer connection. I mean, your solid waste. These are all existential issues. Your housing, I mean, maybe it's a larger question, but how do you influence housing? Take, for example, the informal sector. That's why I brought in that example of Nangal, because when I was teaching in SPA, the final semester, just that anecdote I want to share. And the final year students, we were taking them to the homeless shelters because they had to design the homeless shelter. Can you believe 90% of the people living in homeless shelters are actually working class people? They're not beggars, 90 to 95%. So how do you break the barriers? I don't, I mean, it's a very big question. I don't think I have easy answers or easy solution to that. But I think it's more to engage. I mean, the whole question of engagement. How do we do that? It can be physical, and as I said, it can be, I mean, using the new technology to ensuring that we mount on consistent, considerable pressure. Yeah, I mean, last thing. Okay, please go ahead.
Before you go to the last, I also would like to understand from you, as you mentioned in your interventions, that we have parastatals who not only plan the cities but also are engaged in various other activities. Like we in Delhi, we have the Delhi Jal Board, right? So
Yes.
when we are talking about decentralization, what is it that needs to happen? Like just now, there is a very good balance or imbalance. What in a way, in a manner, like we have parastatals and we also have the city corporations. So do you think this is the proper way that the cities should function, or you would have some other solutions for bringing in more of citizens engagement and proper decentralization?
Well, this is not a proper way at all, according to me, having served the city for 5 years. Uh, because everything that is responsible for, I mean, as far as utilities are concerned, must be under the democratic control. That's my baseline. And when I say democratic control, just not just the control of the city government, but people's control. How are people engaged in that process? And we have often seen, once the parastatals are beyond the democratic control, the way these parastatals behave. And Shimla has a very classic example, particularly about Shimla Water Works, but having said that, I mean, we just can't go back to the Nehruvian model, where the state is going to be intervening in all the aspects. So you require a fair amount of autonomy to the utilities. I don't say the parastatals, to the utilities, and then these utilities should be kept under, under democratic control. And and I don't think I have to explain what democratic control means. Where they are answerable, where the decisions are taken in a democratic
So,
and participatory.
Mayura, there are a few questions being flagged. Would you like to take those now, or I don't think we have much time with us?
Ma'am, sure. There are a couple of questions that we have received, so I'll just let you know a few of them. So one of them is one of the participants wants to know in which way do public-private partnerships can be made useful in sustainable city development and the role of government in that. So can you elaborate on that, one of you, either ma'am or sir?
Ma'am, do you want to take that?
I think it'll be better you, because you are actually running the show. I am behind you. So let us hear your
No,
perspective,
no,
and
you
then
have.
maybe.
We learn from you, ma'am. I mean, all these nuances come out. It's just that this is designed in such a way. Uh, I think there's an important element of public-private partnership. But Mayura, what is private? And when we were switching over to the 90s, so this is what was anticipated, that look, once we open up, once we make our land laws flexible, we'll have massive private, so, and that will be public. So public will mean the city government, and private means the massive private capital, both indigenous and foreign capital, is going to enter. Having said that, what we must realize is that the private capital must come, it has to come, but it comes with certain given baseline, realities. And the reality is whether there's going to be enough, surplus getting generated once the investment takes place. We have the experience, we have data flooding us that post 90s, 50% of the city development processes were still taken by public spending, and it was just 16%, and that too were limited at Bengaluru, or at some places came from. I mean, that was the foreign capital that ventured into these cities. So the point is that, but that doesn't mean that you don't require. Take for example the example Delhi Metro, the way we are building that. Let me share another anecdote now. Now that will give probably another. Can it be a win-win situation? So, ma'am, just give me a second, because that's a very funny and fascinating thing that we did in Shimla. So when Shimla was being dug by Geo, and we all know, I mean, how Geo has entered the fiber network across the country, we didn't allow Geo to dig the town because the right of way was with the city government. And they said, what do you want? So we said, they were already paying us the digging fees and all. We said, no, you lay 2 ducts free of cost for us. Now, Geo was like completely obfuscated. They were perturbed. They went to the chief minister. The chief minister said, no, they are directly elected and they don't come from my party. So you will have to hear, or else they won't allow you entry into the city. And can you believe, nowhere in the country except in Simla, you have 2 ducts lying completely empty in the town. So you have the public, but you have a private intervention. And through this, these 2 private ducts, there could be, the foundation of a smart city building where it can be a win-win situation for the citizens, where you just do not, become victims of, smart metering where people are not. So the point is, yes, it is important. But the point is, how do you make it more participatory? And the point is, how do you ensure that once you have this public-private partnership, it's the public that gets benefited. Of course, the private also wants benefit, but we should not miss that element of public. I think that's it, Mayura.
Yeah, and also among the public, I think those who cannot afford.
Actually, ma'am.
So yeah, so I think we need to have the concerns of the poor, because when we are talking about inclusive cities,
Absolutely.
if a larger section of the people are excluded, then we are really.
Ma'am, I wish we had time, because I wanted to discuss Gurgaon. This transformation, how we shift from planning to more. Now we have, just to give you some very funny stuff. We have more than 20 shopping malls. The walls are, when you enter Gurgaon, you come to know, but you do not have any public transport in Gurgaon. You enter Gurgaon and then you search for public transport. So how do poor people commute? Whereas if you go back to your older towns, even Delhi for that matter, you have like one of the finest public transports, your bus system. So I think that is something important. How do you, yeah, it's rightly, ma'am.
Mayura, any other questions?
Yes, one more, which is quite interesting. One of the participants wants to know that can there be more platforms for the corporators and councillors to be debating over, proposed policies, or whether it can be broadcasted on television or public platforms?
That will be an ideal thing. That's what we
Yeah.
require. I think that's exactly what we require. Forget about it on television, but even if you have webcast and something like that. But that is required. For that, you require citizens group mounting pressure. Unfortunately, in most of the towns, what we are witnessing, except of course, few towns like Bangalore, where you can really see this people's participation, this is like uh, really missing. So, so I think that'll this is something what is very much desired. And this is also missing because there's large alienation taking place. No, I mean, haven't we got learned lessons from the lockdown? I mean, just imagine when the lockdown was announced, people just migrated back. They didn't stay even for 24 hours in the cities. So, what kind of cities are we building? I mean, highly exclusive. So that exclusion doesn't mean the physical exclusion. That is, exclusion is also in this and in these governance models, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely we require such interfaces, such interventions, and it's,
And
it's,
also
it's a brilliant
maybe,
idea.
yeah, sorry, you were saying something.
No, it's a brilliant idea. I just want to say.
Yeah, and also maybe what the Odisha government has
Yes,
recently done, the Jaga mission, which we were discussing
yes, I was
yesterday.
about to say. Yeah,
So empowering the poor and giving them power to really build for themselves, giving them the right to the city in terms of ensuring security of tenure and also holistic development of the city, keeping the poor in the center stage of development. So I think if each and every city in the country could do that, we would have been in a better place now. Mayura, the concluding remarks. I think we have crossed our time, or we are just on time. So
Yes. No, I would actually, finally, I would request both of you to just share in few lines, the key takeaways that you want the young participants to take from today's session before they participate in the competition activities. And one of them being the mayor's speech. I think some key takeaways mentioned by you would be helpful to them.
so Tekinder ji, uh,
ma'am, should I
yeah,
or
please.
okay? So I think uh, I would have loved to speak more, but the time constraint is such a constraint that we can't. And as they say, everything exists in space and time. So my basic point is, we have a historic evolution of urbanization. So when people say that you do not know how to govern your cities, how you build your cities, we said no. Let's go back to our ancient cities, some of the Harappan cities, where we have one of the finest structures we built, and there was no concept of ruler and ruled. I just reiterate that no concept of ruler and ruled. People were actually deciding their, urban mannerism, or the kind of urbanization they want. And you have 5,000 years ago, you had some sewage system which we still do not have in most parts of Delhi. So having evolved from there, and then having walled cities, having this duality, and and then of course the colonial mindset between city and the cantonment and the rich and the poor. I'm completely optimistic. I think the future has to be, as a mayor, if you ask me, I mean, as a former deputy mayor, it has to be that the city belongs to the people, and it has to be extremely participatory. It has to be extremely inclusive if we must ensure that our cities must sustain. And one of the elements which is very important and quite inherently integrated to the whole system is this whole question of climate change and its impact on our infrastructure and all. And because we do not consult the people, because we don't go back to the people, we have seen the kind of infrastructure building. Every year we're finding our cities are being flooded, or we are having heat island effects. These are not sustainable ways. We have to go back to the basics, and the basics is it has to be bottom top. It has to be with the people. Cities are people. That's all I would say.
Thank you so much. I think you have preempted me. I won't. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add. That the cities need to be participatory. Cities need to be inclusive. There should be an eye. While we are planning, I think we should also think about the climate change issues, which are which we have already started witnessing. And for the students, I would also urge that you download the 74th Constitutional Amendment Act, read the Praja's report. I think they have done an excellent job of really looking at all those states, where they are, where they should have been, and what are the reasons why decentralization is still a dream to be realized in the country. I stop here, Mayura. The concluding remarks by you.
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am, and thank you, Tikender sir. We have now come to the end of today's session. I would really like to express heartfelt gratitude on behalf of NIUA and Praja Foundation to both our speakers, Dr. Debolina Kundu and Tikender Singh. Thank you so much for such an informative session. We hope all our participants have enjoyed it as much and benefited from the same. We would like to thank our enthusiastic participants as well, and we shall meet again tomorrow for the next knowledge session on municipal finance at 5 p.m. on Zoom. Before we close the meeting, I would request everyone to please switch on their videos so that we can take a commemorative photograph. And once again, thank you for joining. We shall see you all tomorrow.
Mayur, can you share the link also? Because I didn't get the link.
For sir?
I mean, when it was live on the Facebook, so that we can just post it further.
We will definitely share it with you, sir. We will definitely. Aviral, I hope you are ready for the picture.
Yes, I'm just gonna click in. I can see a couple of smiling faces. So I'll just wait for 10 seconds. Yeah. Okay, we are good to go. 1, 2, 3. All smile, please. Thank you. Yeah, just one more. Thank you. Perfect. We are good.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and hope you all enjoyed this session. We'll see you tomorrow.